All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're here with to welcome you to our winter reading with Land Ethic Vermont. Land Ethic Vermont is a collaborative group that's kind of coalesced around the idea of inspiring and sharing and creating a land ethic in Vermont. You can learn more about it on the Our Vermont Woods website. We'll throw that link in the chat box. You can learn more about a lot of things here in Vermont on Our Vermont Woods website. It's a great website to explore. So let me start off with some Zoom housekeeping. We've done a spotlight, so it highlights the five of us that'll be talking tonight. And if you want, you can turn your cameras off, and then you can go up to the three little dots in the right-hand corner of your screen, and you can hide non-video participants. And that should hide kind of everybody who's turned their camera off, so it focuses on the five on the screen. And so that should work for you. You're certainly welcome to try that. We ask that you mute yourselves so we don't have the background noise from your homes. And if you have any questions, thoughts, book ideas, whatever, go ahead and type them in the chat box. We'll be monitoring the chat box, sharing a little bit out from there as we can, answering questions as we can, and sharing your book ideas following through an email to those who are linked in through the email. So that's that. I think that's all the housekeeping. And so let's get started. We all, the five of us, and everybody will kind of introduce themselves, collaborated to generate a list of our favorite books in the science, nature, conservation, field guide, all those, the whole area. And we had a lot of fun doing that. And there are way too many for us to discuss tonight. But we're going to share a few of our favorites, and we're all avid readers, so our lists were kind of long, and we are excited to share that with you. You can write them all down, but we are going to be sending the list of these book ideas, and we're thinking, who knows, maybe this will be a quarterly event, so that this isn't all the books ideas, but we'll share the list that we have generated. And I'm actually, Ethan, we were going to turn it over to you real quick in the beginning to just sort of talk a little bit where this brainchild came from, because this was Ethan's brainchild, and just wanted to share that. So introduce yourself, share that, and then we'll kick off the discussion.
Sure. So my name's Ethan Tapper. I'm the Chittenden County Forester, and I work for the Vermont Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation. And I do a lot of these presentations with people, talking to people about the forest and sort of how we think about our relationship to our ecosystems, and sort of how we structure that. And when I do these presentations, they're about all different kinds of stuff, ranging from thinking sort of philosophically about our land ethic, our relationship to the land, to thinking more about the nitty-gritty of forest ecology. I reference books that I read, and this is it feels like all the books that I read are about somewhere in that span of different stuff. They're all kind of about forests and ecosystems and our relationship to them. So people ask me, what are books that you'd recommend? And there are ones that I like more than others, and ones I try to steer people towards, and ones I try and steer people more away from. And so I thought it would be really fun to get some of my friends and colleagues to talk about just the books that we really love. Not to have it be like a comprehensive list, like these are all the good books, and it certainly won't be, but just to be like, these are some resources that we, as people who, sort of do this for a living and think about this a lot, these are ones that we really enjoy, and to sort of share those with you. And sort of as we head into like winter reading season, it seemed like the right time. Yeah, and just to put in a plug for Land Ethic Vermont. So Land Ethic Vermont is this great organization, which is comprised of all these really amazing people, some of whom are here, but also of these amazing organizations. So these conservation organizations like Vermont Land Trust and Vermont Coverts and Vermont Woodlands Association, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Vermont Department of Forest Recreation, Forest Parks and Recreation, and others that are all sort of working together on the same team to think about, how do we relate to the land? What's our land ethic? And so this is just such a great organization to collaborate with on something like this. And I guess I'll pass it off to Alaire to just introduce who you are.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. I'm Alaire Diamond. I'm an ecologist with Vermont Land Trust. I've been working with Land Ethic Vermont for the last 2 years or so. It's a wonderful group of people. And one of the first things that I ask any of you when we get together, either virtually or in person, is what books have you been reading lately? So when Ethan sent out that email about let's do this event, it was like, of course, I'll be there. Even if it's tonight, I'll come and do it. I read like all the time, often start my day before work, kind of trying to read a little bit about whether it's in a magazine or chapter of a book or something that like connects with ecology and the work that I do with the Land Trust. So I'm really excited to be here tonight and share with everybody and hear from everybody else about what you're doing too. Alan, pass to you.
Thanks, Lair, and thanks to you guys for helping organize this. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm a consulting forester and biologist in central Vermont. I'm also the president of Vermont Woodlands Association, and this was a really funny request to share my favorite books. And I showed it to my wife, and she kind of looked back at me and she said, "You don't read, Alan." So this will be a reminder that the things that I do read aren't necessarily, they're really, I don't read a lot of fiction. There are a lot of informational stuff, a lot of scientific stuff, and a lot of practical knowledge that I really enjoy reading about. So that maybe that'll be my strengths for this evening, but thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Andrea Shortsleeve. I'm a habitat biologist for Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And one of the things I really love about Land Ethic Vermont is like it's a group of people that think differently than I do, but we still have a really common goal about conservation in the state. And so being a part of this reading group is really exciting because kind of get to see where people's kind of backgrounds and thoughts come from. And so I'm excited to learn more about what other people are reading. Steve, do you want to jump in? You're pinned.
Great, yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Hagenburg. I'm a conservation biologist and forester with Audubon Vermont, so bird conservation organization, and I'm part of the Land Ethic Vermont steering committee as well. Great to be here with you tonight, and thanks for joining us. Like Alan, I find that my reading happens in very short spurts, basically the time from when I get into bed to the 2 minutes later when I fall asleep. It's a very between working and raising kids and running a farm and doing all the other fun things that I like to do. I find sitting down for extended periods of time doesn't tend to happen. So I've been reading the same book for quite some time, and I have a couple things to share. One which is pretty non-traditional, I would say, from the perspective of the topics that we're looking at tonight. But nonetheless, it's a great. I enjoy reading very much, and really thinking about the land and all of its inhabitants and how we are all part of that same community is a theme that I try to find in many of the books that I do end up reading. So looking forward to hearing what everybody has to share. And I think we've gone around the circle, haven't we? So I'll turn it back.
I think we have.
To Lisa. Yeah.
That's great, Steve. Thanks. I'm really glad you could join us tonight, all of you. It's a lot of fun. So I don't know if I said I was with Vermont Coverts, so yay, that's awesome. And I'm going to kick it off, and Alaire's going to start off and share what she's been reading lately in the area of sort of natural history, ecology, and ecosystems. Take it away, Alaire.
Classic muted.
Alaire seems to be frozen. Oh wait, there you are.
Am I here? Okay.
You're here.
I'm going to share a book that I actually read a couple of years ago, but that's been really informing a lot of my thinking about my work, the ecological restoration and ecological work that I do. And this is a book called Beaver by Ben Goldfarb, and it's all about beavers. And what's really interesting to me about it is just that it really makes me think about the landscape that we live in a very different way. That instead of, thinking about when the role of beavers in Vermont in particular, and compared with the historical visions that we had of Vermont once white settlers began to come here. Beavers were almost gone. And so it's a really interesting kind of look back in time to what our landscape would have looked like, or thinking about what it was before beavers were really all trapped out by like the late 1600s. We would have had a lot more wetlands, a lot fewer sort of fast moving streams. And I think about this all the time in the work that I'm doing, where we're trying to restore streams and restore wetlands. So I think about beavers as sort of a model to look to. And this book really gives a great detailed description from a lot of different angles of just the way that beavers influence our landscape. So I highly recommend it. And there's some of our local Land Ethic Vermont people are actually quoted in this book too. So it's got a local connection.
Alair, did the book have any mention about the differences between wetlands that are occupied by beavers and wetlands that aren't occupied by beavers?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I mean,
specifically wetlands that maybe have never been occupied by beavers.
I don't know if I don't remember that specifically, because I think when beavers were at their full population, I think that they would have occupied every wetland that was that had enough resources for them to be in. Yeah.
One of the facts that I always share about beavers that like blows people's minds, one that Kim Royer told me, who's probably quoted in that book.
She's in the book, yeah.
Yeah, she was saying that there may have been in our valleys, there may have been as many as 300 beaver dams per square mile in Vermont. So that's a square mile, 640 acres. So that's a beaver dam every 2 acres. Yeah. And that really by the late 1600s, there's some amazing fact that by the late 1600s, 250,000 beaver pelts had been shipped to Europe from the Connecticut River Valley of Vermont alone.
Yeah.
Massive, massive influence.
Yeah, and it's a huge impact. And one fact from this book that I actually looked up, the paper that was referenced in the book, is that once those beavers were trapped and their pelts were sold, the dams that they had been maintaining kind of fell apart. And when they all fell apart cumulatively, there was this massive amount of sediment that went down the Connecticut River. And people have been able to find that sediment, because it was such a huge slug of it at kind of one time, over one short period of time, in the Atlantic Ocean, and can date it back to the Connecticut River Valley from the late 1600s. So it's crazy the impact that they've had.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fascinating too. You talk about, what the biological carrying capacity is, which, we were talking about, versus the cultural carrying capacity, what we're able to tolerate. I mean, someone might love them until they're flooding their driveway. And then they're a problem. So it's just an interesting conundrum. So what a great book to recommend. Thanks.
It's great. Yeah.
So moving on to Alan.
This is proof that I do read or have read. We're gonna, let's see this. Oh, backwards. Sorry, I know that. The Natural History of Trees of Eastern and Central North America. This is a book that was published. I'm gonna just guess its first pressing was back in the 1948, and it's by an author named Donald Petey, with a funny spelling. Natural History of Trees, and it picks species that are found in Eastern and Central North America, and it gives kind of your classic identification tools, classic range and habitat where you'd likely to find it, and then it always dedicates a couple pages to how the tree and the wood have contributed to the culture of North American wood users, and how we as a culture think about the wood. This is an excerpt about black cherry. In the forest, the tallest of all cherries and the most precious cabinet wood in the rose family may rise to a noble 100 feet in height, with a trunk clear of branches for 30 feet and attaining 4 or 5 feet in diameter. In the days when our woods were rich with such fine old cherry trees, the Appalachian pioneers invented a drink called cherry bounce. A juice pressed from the fruits was infused in brandy or rum to make a cordial, which, though bitter, was in high favor among the old-time mountaineers. Bears were plentiful in the Appalachians, and the cubs of the year learned to climb trees by following their mothers up the trees. And it goes on being written in the 1940s. it gives you the 1940 culture of each tree, and where in the case of the cherry, where the cabinet makers were thinking about cherries, how we thought about the wildlife using those woods. And of course, in the 40s, this was post-agricultural time and a lot of redevelopment of forests and forest management. And I've used this to inform my understanding of the current, but often fad-like use of our woods as we talk about oak and cherries and maple and the different hardwoods, especially in their value to our manufacturing processes. They ebb and flow, and the ebbs and flows, when it's a really high market value, that those trees get fewer and fewer on the landscape on a kind of continent-wide scale, and it really has changed the way that our desires change the way that our ecosystem looks, for sure.
I've heard there was an amazing article, Alan, by Lord Erland, I think it was in Northern Woodlands, where there's a ton of different reasons, climate resilience, adaptation, all these other things, wildlife habitat, for encouraging diversity in our forests. But he actually made an argument for species diversity, encouraging lots of different species of trees from an economic perspective, because of those different fads in woods tend to fluctuate over time. So, what's the point of managing our forests of today for wood uses and wood benefits that, those trees aren't going to be cut down for, could be 100 years.
Noting the fad, black cherry is considered a junk tree in the 1950s because it had been, all the good cherry had been removed in the past 50 or 100 years. And so there just wasn't enough left to build your bed frame anymore.
Alan, sorry, go ahead, Andrea.
I was just going to say, I think it'd be interesting too to see how which wildlife uses have been changed in the different editions of this, just based on what people used to study and new research and different focuses that we have now in different wildlife species since the 40s.
A lot of references for bear and deer here.
Yeah, maybe some partridge.
Right.
Yeah, Alan, I was curious about how they discuss maple. As we know, the maple industry really has kind of gone on this, it has ebbed and flowed over the past and our history, where I'm not remembering the timeline of this, but at one point, pretty far back in our history, maple production was actually about where it maybe even exceeded what is produced today, because pretty much every farmer also sugared in their woodlot. And today we're kind of at this high point again with large amounts of acreage being managed as sugar bush and tapped and syrup produced. But I'm curious, in the 40s, is there mention of where things kind of stood at that point in time?
Sugar maple gets like 6 or 7 pages. And of course, there's paragraphs for black maple and red maple and mountain maple and striped maple and silver maple and box elder. Great deference is given to the sugar maple for all the reasons that you stated. There's a wonderful picture of a classic sugar bush, buckets and the sugar house in the background. There is no properly planted New England village without its sugar maples. I don't think my town, Waterbury, has we've got properly planted sugar maples. We do indeed. It's an awesome book. It's a great book for your 2 minutes before you fall asleep, Steve.
All right, I'll jump in with my book. I've been reading Nature's Best Hope by Douglas Talamay. He's a professor in Massachusetts, and he's written a couple books, but this is one of, I guess he's got a newer one, but I'm still working through this one. And it's really interesting because it looks at conservation on a backyard scale, which has become an interest of a lot of people in the last 2 years, now that we're spending a lot more time at home looking at just what we can do in our own backyards and smaller parcels. And it really has changed the way I think about a lot of things, even in my neighborhood. So It's easy to read. It's got a lot of really nice pictures, and yeah, I think it's a really enjoyable book so far.
For those of you who don't know Doug Tallamy, he's like the pollinator guy, right? Is what a lot of people know him as. And of course, like many of us, he's focuses on one specific area, but is actually more of just a conservationist as well. And he wrote a book. Andrea told me this thing when we were walking in the woods one time about how important dead wood is for pollinators. And I just never thought about it. And of course, you know, Vermont has 300 plus native species of bees, and most of them live in the woods, right? They don't live in those wildflower meadows. They live in dead wood and in leaf litter. That led me to reading Doug Tallamy's book, The Nature of Oaks, which is about how important oaks are for a lot of our native pollinators and for our invertebrates in general. It's another awesome one by him.
Yeah.
I love I'm reading Bringing Nature Home by him. So like you said, many of these authors are prolific with a number of different books that they've written, and I find that interesting. And I think, you know, you talk about dead wood, Ethan. I have to tell you something I learned yesterday. I was watching Tony D'Amato, and I never heard the word morticulture before.
Morticulture. How about
morticulture.
Necromass.
I was just like, oh, that's kind of cool, you know, just the management of the dead wood. And it was sort of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you go out with a bunch of foresters and ecologists out into an old growth forest, they're not going to be taking pictures of the live trees. They're going to be taking a lot of pictures of like big dead trees on the ground and big dead standing trees. Just such a fascinating part of ecology, you know, that our forests, just because of their land use history and other reasons, just don't have right now.
Well, why don't you share your book with us, Ethan?
Well, that perfectly leads me in, because I want to share the book. I don't know if you can read this. The Hidden Forest, the Autobiography of an Ecosystem, which is by John R. Luoma. And I'm sharing this. So this is a book about forest ecology in the Pacific Northwest. But it's the best book about forest ecology that I've ever read, by far. One of the things that makes it genius, I think, is, you know, it's this, like, there are geniuses who can understand really complex concepts. And then, like, for me, the whole other level of genius is your ability to explain it in a simple way, you know, and to make it engaging. And so this whole book it's about, you know, the way that ecosystems work, and it's written in this really engaging way. It's story is woven into it. It's the best. It's so good. And it's about the Andrews Experimental Forest, which is in Oregon. Oregon, which is the home of a lot of our, the progenitors of the type of forestry that I and Alan and others practice, which is called ecological forestry, or it's been called new forestry. You know, just basically the idea that we should manage our ecosystems like they manage themselves, you know, manage them sort of with deference to natural processes and as these whole systems, which are more than just trees. And so the book it's sort of the study of, or looking at this Andrews Experimental Forest, which is this multidisciplinary, this place where all these people from different disciplines get together and engage in the practice of studying what an ecosystem is on many different levels. And so there are people there who are studying geology and certainly trees, but also small mammals and fungi and bacteria and soil chemistry and geomorphology, and all integrating that into a collective understanding of what a forest is, what an ecosystem is, and embracing some other facets that we don't see in some of the other literature about forests, like the embrace of death and change and all of these other forces, processes in the forest that are sometimes intimidating, but are also, you know, these incredibly important and beautiful parts of how they work. It's basically a book about ecology. And there's just this really, when I was flipping through it, again, this is a book that I have a hard time keeping my hands on, because now whenever I buy it, I buy like 3 copies because I keep on giving it to people. But I have a copy right now, and I was flipping through it before this, and just wanted to read this excerpt. Although studying what Aldo Leopold called a wounded world has indeed driven some professional ecologists to activism, the science of ecology itself is a branch of biology focused on studying connections and relationships in the natural world. It is the science of who eats whom and who lives where, and how energy and nutrients course through the tissue of the living world, the science of the study and the production of living tissue and its consumption and decay. It is the great integrative biological science of not just molecules, not just cells, not just whole organisms, but of the complex dance of nature across space and time. And so that is just, you know, such a, for me to hear like such a complex idea expressed so clearly and so beautifully is really important. So that's my fave. I would love to see a version of this for our eastern forests, but a lot of the stuff that they talk about is really, you know, the species of trees are different, but the forces and the way that the forest changes and works are very, very similar to the way that our eastern forests work.
So two things, Ethan. The first is I'm expecting a copy for the holidays. Thank you very much. Since you
I got an extra.
All right, I think it's mine. The second is I think you've figured out what your first book is going to be. I mean, you're a prolific writer. I think you should translate that into an Eastern book.
The Hidden Forest 2, The Hidden Eastern Forest.
There you go. Great. Well, I'm going to share a book by Bern Heinrich. He's retired. There we go. No, it's not going to work. Winter World. My lighting is really bad. Sorry, everybody. It's called Winter World, and it's all about animal survival in the winter. And I do love to read, but I find novels really engage me. And then technical books, I have to sit and really focus on and read and take notes or reread. And I found that this book is sort of like a tale and a memoir, and it was much more easy to stay engaged in. And the information was very accessible. Like some people, you know, might like something very sciencey, and I got enough sciencey stuff. But I really like being able to kind of flow through and learn things while not really realizing I'm engaging in learning things. And so, you know, learning about the critters in the subnivean layer underneath the snow, and you know, the importance of the downed wood, that the snow kind of leaves a little tunnel next to the wood, and it just was really engaging and a lot of fun to read. And I loved that it was a Vermont connection. You know, I was thinking Alaire was talking about her eager beaver, and that it quotes some people here in Vermont in it. And this is a UVM professor. And so it has a Vermont and a Maine connection because he has a cabin up in the Maine woods. So and he has a number of different books, but Winter World really, because we live so much of Vermont in the snow and the cold and the winter, it's just so fascinating and fun for me to read. So that was my pick.
Lisa, the thing that I love about Bern Heinrich's writing style is you can tell that he really, really just loves to learn, and the way that he uses his observations and turns those observations into just many, many mini scientific experiments is so fun to hear him talk about. And all of his books kind of are those mini experiments, mini observations doled out in a really neat prose. And I loved his golden crown kinglet explanation, all fluffy and furry, trying to deal with the cold temperatures.
Yeah.
He also, he's really interesting. He's a really interesting guy. He also has a book about, he's like has been a world record holder in like ultra long distance running, and has an amazing book about how he like learned from animals in the natural world about how to be an ultra marathoner.
I love that book. I basically have a Bern Heinrich shelf in my house. But I wanted to say about, I literally do. I think I have 9 or 10 books by him. Lisa, the Winter World, I love that book as well. And I think one thing I wanted to say about it is just that it's a great book for younger readers too. Like, it's not necessarily like young kids, but I have used parts of it with high school students. I think middle school students could really get a piece out of it. And you know, just like Alan said, the way that he tells the stories and the way that the chapters are arranged in that book, it's like there are these great little vignettes that are kind of this bite-sized package or chapter-sized package that really is a great story. So it's one that I think is really great for a lot of different ages of people. It's not dense in that way.
Yeah. I realized that the books that I picked were all about kind of observation and how to be more observant outdoors and how to ask questions while you're observing. So it was very funny because when I was thinking about it, I didn't realize that the books I selected had sort of this theme through them, but but they kind of did. So I love all your observations because that's exactly why I love it. Because it's like you said, I need to be able to read something before I fall asleep. And so the small vignettes, the easy chapters, it's good for me. Steve, what
Yeah.
have you got for us?
Well, I was just going to say before I share my first one here, he may be familiar with Summer World, which he also wrote. So it kind of is a same style as Winter World, but gets into the whole different, obviously, seasonality and time of year. So great stuff there. So my book I wanted to share is the Vermont Almanac. And this is something that has come out last year was the first year that it was published, and they have just released the next version of it. So volume 2 of the Vermont Almanac, and it's been put together and organized by many of the folks who you may be familiar with from that used to be part of Northern Woodlands magazine. So Dave Mance and Ginny Barlow and others who had an association, and some of them, like Ginny, was even a founder of what was Vermont Woodlands at the time before it became Northern Woodlands, came together and they put together this almanac for Vermont, which for me, as I kind of went through it, it really was, it exemplified what I think of as the land ethic and what a land ethic means to me, because it really brings together people with the natural world and how people relate to the natural world. So it's broken out into each month. So there's kind of 12 different sections. This is why it works good for me. I can pick a month and I can kind of sort through it in the short amount of the time that I spend reading each day. And it goes into each chapter. Each month starts off with a section about the previous year's weather during that month. And that's put together by Roger Hill, who's a well-known weather forecaster. If anybody listens to WDEV radio here out of Waterbury, he's the weather forecaster there. And I know he works with a lot of other places as well, ski areas included. But it kind of goes through a perspective of what that weather was like last year. And it's really interesting to read that because I don't tend to remember. Everybody's like, well, what was the weather like last winter? I'm like, I don't really remember. Now I will, because I can take a look at this book here. But then he has, so just for example, for December, after Roger Hill's description of the weather, there's some kind of notes about nature. People are familiar with Northern Woodlands magazine when Ginny Barlow had a column in there, forgetting the name of it now, but it's kind of the seasonal, and they still have it in the magazine. It's kind of things that happen during the different months of that season in the natural world. And there's a little bit of that in each one of these chapters. But then there's a thing about winter teas and chaga and kind of a little bit of a description of that and an essay, I guess is a better way to put it. And then there's a piece about how to make a classic balsam wreath, which is neat. And then there's a nice long story about a family that has been running a Christmas tree farm for many years, with some really nice photographs and just gets into that human connection to the land, which is really for me what thinking about land ethic is all about. So definitely highly recommend it. You can search online, Google the Vermont Almanac, and if you're interested, find a way to order a copy and it'll be mailed right to your door. So they're doing a great job, and I highly encourage people to check out Vermont Almanac.
I've already got my second edition.
Me too.
They're also available at your local library, because I think they gave them to all the libraries in Vermont. So it's another way
Awesome.
to access it if you need to access it that way. I'm so glad you brought that up and talked about the land ethic, Steve. We all, kind of have collaborated together in this Land Ethic Vermont, and we all have this land ethic and ethical relationship and responsibility to the land, and it changes over time and as you read and as you experience. And so the question that we kind of threw out to each other is, what is a book that has shaped your land ethic and how is sort of the question. So I'm going to kick it off with Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. I started reading this book when I was in college as part of a class. And it was one of those things, like, I have to read this, and the prose is not easy. Because it was just not what I was used to reading. And so it was great. But then you learn a little bit about Leopold, and then you really read the book. And then I read it again when I was teaching a class, as I wanted to share more about it. We share a little bit about it in the Coverts training. And then this past year, we did a slow read over Zoom every other month with some of our coverage cooperators. Some of you on this call were on that with me. And it was just so pleasurable to read this book slowly. Like, it's an almanac, like Steve talked about the Vermont Almanac. And what's nice is you read it, like he said, in vignettes. So we read January and February, and then we talked about them. And it was so great to read it while it was happening, because I could relate to what Leopold was seeing on his Wisconsin sand farm, and then translate it to here. And what was he observing there? And what was I observing here? And it really, the way he wrote about things gave them life. And it was just so fun to read it that way. And the book is broken up into like these 4 different parts. The first part being the almanac by month, so you can read that. The second part being essays that he's done through his lifetime. And then the third part was sort of, what is the third part? Was more on like places. And then the fourth part was sort of the upshot, sort of his idea on how do we share this land ethic? And he didn't really have an answer, because the land ethic is never really written. It's something that changes over time. When we finish the coverage training, after we spent a whole week, I usually read this part, and I want to read it to all of you, because I do think it really speaks to me on what his concept is, and what, you know, in 1949 he wrote, well, it's published, but this is from 1949, and it still holds true today. And that's what's so amazing about this book to me. And so it goes, all ethics so far evolved rest upon a single premise, that the individual is a member of a community of interdependent parts. His instincts prompt him to compete for his place in the community, but his ethics prompt him to also cooperate, perhaps in order that there may be a place to compete for. The land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, or collectively the land. So I find that fascinating. And so many readings that I've been doing of more recent authors kind of just re-emphasize those same sort of concepts and how to look at it today. And so it was a great book for me, and I hope you all enjoy it and read it. If you haven't read it, every coverage cooperator has one. Take it off your shelf and read it. And if you're not a cooperator and you want to become one, check out the website. And if you haven't read it and you don't want to be a cooperator, read it anyway. So I'm going to pass it on to Alaire.
That's great, Lisa. Thanks. Yeah, it's such a good book. And I think one thing I love about Sand County Almanac and Aldo Leopold's work is just that I think he was really revolutionary, as you know, in the field that he was in, which was forestry, forest management, land management, and at the time that he was writing. And one thing that I've really been thinking a lot about and taking time to learn about in the last couple of years are Indigenous perspectives on land and on the way that we relate to land. And I think that Aldo Leopold, a white person, a white man, came to some similar views about the ethical relationship that we have to land, in other ways not. But one book that I've really been enjoying lately is this one. I'm not actually very far in it. I'm reading it right now. It's called Being Together in Place, Indigenous Coexistence in a More Than Human World. It's by a couple of authors, Soren Larson and Jay Johnson, and it can be a little bit academic in places. There's some terms that I don't necessarily understand right away, and I need to look them up. They're from the field of geography, and just general social sciences. But I just want to read the first sentence of the book to you, because it really just opened like a new perspective to me, as somebody who has been trained in sort of not too dissimilar of a way as Aldo Leopold was in sort of land management, forest management, ecology. Things interconnect and interrelate. But humans are somehow, we're connected, but we're also a little bit apart. And we're different from places, and we can move around to different places and sort of develop relationships with them. This book really just throws that all open in a completely different way. And so the first sentence is, coexistence begins in place, the places we come from and call home, the places we care for and struggle over, the places that sustain us, the places we share. We call this book Being Together in Place because whether we acknowledge it or not, place convenes our being together, bringing human and non-human communities into the shared predicaments of life, livelihood, and land. place calls us to the struggles, and then just further down the page, place has its own agency. And it was really just fascinating to me to think about a place, which I think I have been trained to think about a place as being, there are different species that live in a certain area, there's different soils, there's human, history and so forth. But this is just kind of putting it together in a much more pluralistic way and saying the place itself has agency. It's not one part or two, multiple parts, but it's this kind of like more than human, more than any one species world. And the one place that really struck home for me with that is that one of the authors that they cite, one of the articles that's cited in the book as a reference, the author is actually a place. And there's multiple authors, but the first author on this paper is actually a physical place in Australia. And that just, as someone who's traditionally trained in an academic setting, just a really different way to think about it. Like, could a place, we spend our time learning about a place, does that place actually have the agency to be an author and a storyteller itself? And I think we all can understand that you go into certain places and you have experiences and you learn and you're inspired, but what is that place's agency actually doing? So this is a book that's really kind of shaping my land ethic in the moment as we speak, as I've continued to get through it. And I'm really excited to think about where that can go. There's a lot more to it than what I just shared. It gets very deeply into different Indigenous groups around the world and their struggles with different things happening in places that are important to them, and the way that they've actually engaged with those places and other people, other players to affect change. That's a part that I'm just still getting into, but really interesting and kind of a mind-changing book that I recommend. Andrea.
A book that really has changed the way that I think about a lot of things, especially the land ethic, is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. It's definitely a book we talked about a lot. I know several book clubs that have read it. Yeah, so we've all read it, but I wanted to bring it up tonight because I just think it's such a beautifully written book that has so many really insightful comments. The author she's an Indigenous woman who is also a botany professor in upstate New York. And so she combines these really two unique perspectives of like kind of a traditional background with also a scientifically trained background, and just her observations about the natural world is just so moving. The book's written in a series of vignettes, so you can pick it up and put it down, and it's not a plot throughout. So I really enjoyed that part, and a lot of it's also set in upstate New York or in our region, and so a lot of the things that she writes about are things that you can just observe outside. The plants and things are easily identifiable, and I really recommend this book. Everyone that I've talked to about it has just really loved it. So that's my land ethic book. So I guess Alan, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and first I'll just say I think this is really neat because when we develop a land ethic, I mean, it can't be developed at any one time, but I thought, okay, well, what did I read in college? And when was I most eager to learn about my place in life? And when was I most willing to be shaped by somebody else's words? And a lot of it was in the kind of my early 20s and maybe that was about it. And so a lot of my kind of where do I get my land ethic from books comes from that time. And it's great to hear that Alaire and Andrea, and you're bringing kind of books that are definitely more recent. I think the Sweetgrass is probably in the last couple of years. I'm not sure what I'm actually also doing, like I'm Googling all these books as they're getting said. So that's been helpful. All right. My land ethic book comes from my college years. It's Ishmael. It was very popular among freshmen in college by Daniel Quinn. And it tells this really sweet story. It's a fiction book, but it tells a sweet story about a gorilla who teaches a visitor to the zoo about his place in the world and how valuable it is as humans to treat the world in a respectful way. And it sounds like a very simple and very simple story and simple message, but the way that the message is played out over the book is just a wonderful it's laid out in a really good argumentative way, I suppose. And I remember reading this when I was 20 and thinking that it was just the most amazing thing that I had read, and it was going to change the world, and how empowered you feel when you read this stuff. And that was a book that just at the time really meant a lot to me. And they broke the world out into leavers and takers, and the good people were the leavers, and the bad civilizations of the world were takers. And I think the opening line is, with man gone, will gorilla survive, as if men were responsible for the life of the gorillas. And the closing statement is, with gorilla gone, will men survive? And Ishmael. And there's like even sequels to the book too. It's fun read. And it's great, as I read it when I was in college. It's certainly a great read for younger folks too.
I hadn't heard of that one. I'm actually going to go Google that one and check it out. That sounds really interesting. Thank you. I do want to share something about braiding sweetgrass. So I read it and was listening. I'm also listening to it because Robin Wall Kimmerer reads it, and it's really, really cool to hear. If you've ever heard her speak, it's very interesting. St. Mike's, actually, their entire freshman class read Braiding Sweetgrass, and then they had discussions on it in small groups in their however they did that. And then they had her do a presentation for them, and they actually opened it up. And so I was able to watch that on Zoom, and it's very fascinating to hear her talk and give this presentation. So it's really great to hear her read the book. So I just want to share that you can also get that through Libby in your library if you want to download it. I'm sure it's on Audible, things like that. So that's kind of cool. All right. Good. Ethan.
I was going to say in that book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer said something that I refer to often when I talk to people, which is the idea that we have this idea that with the land, right, that when we own a piece of land, that we're like, we own all these rights. You know, we have the right to develop it or not develop it. We have the right to, you know, do X, Y, and Z. We own the mineral rights and the timber rights and all these different things. And she's like, you know, I think that we also inherit a bundle of responsibilities, right? That why should we just have all the rights to this piece of land without having also any responsibility towards it? Which is to me just such a profound statement about the land ethic. You know, what is our responsibility to the land? What's our responsibility to each other? That I think she put really beautifully. I want to share my land ethic book, which is this book called Runes of the North. And it's by Sigurd Olsen. I was really pleasantly surprised. I thought this is one of these books that just like appeared in my life. And I think I found it in an antique bookstore, an old hardcover version, an antique bookstore in Bellows Falls, which is near where I grew up. And I just thought that I was the only person in the world that knew about this book. And it was really cool because I found out that Alaire owns a copy of the book. And I think that I didn't discover this guy, that he was actually a really important environmentalist and thinker and wilderness advocate. So this is another older book. So like Sand County Almanac, when you read it, it feels very contemporary, but it's from like the early 40s. And this is a book from 1965. Sigurd Olsen was a wilderness guide in this area of like the Great Lakes region. I think it's called the Quetico Superior. So like northern Minnesota into Ontario. And he was inspired by these people called the Voyageurs, or I'm butchering that pronunciation. I think it's we would call it the Voyageurs, who are basically the French Canadians in the 18th and 19th century, who were, fur trappers and fur traders and exploring this, hitherto to white people unknown country. And this book is about, it's just a book about him exploring the world and, his thoughts on his relationship to it. It's absolutely beautifully written. So this is, I was telling these guys when we met up beforehand that I read this book, of course, gave it to somebody, and then remembered it, ordered a few more copies, which I now have 2 of left, And I started reading it again, and I was reading it, and I was like halfway through the first chapter, and then I put it down, and I got on my computer and ordered every other book that I could find that he had written. It's like that status of goodness. He's written about 10 books, and yeah, and it's just about being a person in the world, and in a wild world, you know, in a world in wonderment of nature and ecosystems, and thinking really hard about, you know, what that means to be a person in the world. Yeah, so I guess, Steve, do you have a book you want to add about this?
Well, I wasn't quite prepared for the question as it was presented. So, but I do have a book that I'm going to share. I have a little bit of a different take on the question. So what I'm going to share is not a book that really is kind of shaped my own land ethic, but it's a book that I think brings the concept of a land ethic to those who may otherwise not seek out some of the types of books that we have been hearing about this evening. And it's a new one that I just got. My family bought it for me for my birthday in October this year. It is written by, some folks may know this character named Ron Swanson from a TV show called Parks and Recreation, used to be on. And his real name is Nick Offerman. And the book is entitled Where the Deer and the Antelope Play, the Pastoral Observations of One Ignorant American Who Loves to Walk Outside. So that's the title of the book. Nobody bought this from me thinking it was about someone's land ethic or getting to think about a land ethic. But I have actually really enjoyed it. One, because I tend to really like this guy and his humor. But two, because he talks about Leopold. He talks about, there's some other folks in here, which I'm actually not remember the names of right now, but it's kind of written, you know, there's some crassness to it. There's some political aspects to it, but there's also this sense of getting him making observations about his own connection to place and to the land, as well as how he observes other people relating to the land. And he does it through a number of different sections, one which was a trip that he took with two friends of his to Glacier National Park for some hiking and other whitewater rafting and things like that. Then some time he spent in England, where he spent time with a family farm that raised sheep. And then the last section is with him and his wife during the pandemic, traveling around the country in their newly purchased Airstream camper. But it's I can imagine someone picking this up who hasn't really thought about their land ethic, or even thought that there is such a thing as land ethic. And all of a sudden they start reading through this, and it might make them start to pause and think a little bit about, it's an interesting thing. Who's this Leopold guy he's talking about? And maybe they'll start to seek that out and learn more about it. So for me, it's a fun read, because again, like I said, I enjoy Nick Offerman and his type of humor. So it's certainly, again, it's kind of an outcast maybe from the types of books we're talking about tonight, but I do think it has the potential to help other people who are who haven't traditionally maybe thought about this kind of thing to start to explore it.
That sounds like fun.
It is.
So we had another round planned, but obviously we're going to run out of time. So here's what I'd like to do. We're going to do a lightning round. So any of you who have been to the FEMC conference, you know what a lightning round is. So you're going to have to talk fast, which I'm very good at, and share your title, the author, and 1 or 2 sentences at most about the next book that you want to pick. So I had 2, so I'm just going to pick one. I had The Lost Art. What is my camera not work? All right. The Lost Art of Reading Nature Signs, and it's by Tristan Gooley. And it's one of those books that it's funny, it gets good reviews, it gets bad reviews. He's kind of Britain, it has things, but I loved it because it was a lot of little things. There's a little bit about the stars, a little bit about trees, a little bit about wildlife and tracking, a little bit about weather. So it really gave you the opportunity to quickly see and learn something that you can share at a cocktail party, or you can share with a child. And I was working a lot with kids, so it was perfect. So that's my other book that I shared.
Are we theming this, Lisa, or just throwing something out there?
Just throwing something out there. Although that was my pick.
I'll throw some out there. Bill Torrey. Cutting remarks. 40 years in the forest, Bill Torrey is now a retired logger. He is a storyteller and humorist from Bolton, Vermont, a good friend of mine, and just is a joy to read about his adventures behind a skidder and chainsaw in the early days of his life. And it's a really special read. You can read a couple of his books or see him on the moth. He does some moth stories too. Bill Torrey. Ethan.
I've got one. This is not a deep cut because this book won the Pulitzer Prize. So this is a book called The Sixth Extinction: An Unnatural History by Elizabeth Colbert. Another genius, solely for her ability to explain really complex concepts in a way that is not hard to read and it's a breeze. And what it's about is, we focus on climate change a lot, which is this incredibly profound emergency and threat in our world. But she also is talking more about what we call global change, right? Which is all of the other things that are happening to our ecosystems, the loss of biodiversity, non-native invasive plants, pests, pathogens. She talks about ocean acidification and human history, like Paleolithic human history, and all these other really cool things. Easy book to read, really, really important to just know what's going on with global change in the world.
Nancy, yes, we have a list of all the books that we're talking about and even more that we'll send out either tomorrow or the next day. So my next book, The Mindful Carnivore by Tobar. He's a local author, lives just outside of Montpelier, and it's kind of a memoir of his journey from being a fairly hardcore vegan to being a hunter and procuring his own meat. And it's just an interesting kind of perspective that really kind of challenges the way you think about where our food comes from, and just an easy read.
Andrea, did you procure any of your own meat this fall?
No, I missed my one opportunity last Sunday and I am still kicking myself for it. Yep.
Blair, what you got?
Hard to choose the last one, but I'm going to recommend Underland by Robert Mcfarlane. This is it's a deep time journey. He's just very philosophically, poetically, combination of sort of memoir, travel, science, nature writing. It was a book that I read on vacation. It was when I had a lot of time to sort of sit on a deck and read, and it was just utterly absorbing. He's a beautiful writer. And just really delving into what's beneath the surface of our world in many different ways, from mycelial networks and forests to deep, like places where nuclear waste is sort of buried deep within the earth, and just a really again, very absorbing, very different perspective from me, who I normally am on the surface of the earth. So I love this book, and I really seek out other works by him as well. Steve.
Yeah, well, I think I'm actually going to go with Ethan's Sigurd Olsen, because when you brought up that name, and I don't have a specific title of his to talk about, but when you brought up that name, it reminded me that I think that when my grandfather passed away, I got a lot of things from their home, that there was actually some books that may have been Sigurd Olsen books. And I love books that are about kind of wilderness travel and musings that happen when on backcountry trips, which I think, from what your description was and my recollection a little bit of these books is where this was going. So I'm going to seek those out and dive into those as kind of a next read for me, because I think there's a lot of reflection that can happen when I read those books, kind of the slow passage of time that happens on those trips. So thanks for re-inspiring that and bringing that back into my memory.
Well, that's awesome. We're at 8 o'clock and I know we could each go around again and again and again, which is really awesome. And there were a number of books that people suggested in the chat as well. And like we said, you know, we thought maybe we'd do this as a quarterly event, bring in other people from Land Ethic to share their books, because I learned about books that I haven't had a chance to read before and ones that I kind of want to go back to. So hopefully all of you who have joined us tonight or watch this in the future have learned about some books that you might want to read or comment on or bring to a book group. I do want to say that we encourage you to check out the Land Ethic Vermont homepage and look at the Land Ethic Library. On there are also some essays that have been written over the last year and published on the idea of a land ethic. And there's also a project we worked on called the Land Ethic Library Project. And actually it works through Aldo Leopold's Almanac concept, where in January it discusses the January reading, but then it suggests other recommended readings to support those concepts for that month. So it's kind of exciting. That's all can be found on the Land Ethic Vermont homepage. And if you're a writer or you're interested in sharing your concepts on a land ethic, we'd love to see those as well. And they could be published on that website. So it's kind of a neat thing. So those are some of the resources that we have through the collaborative that we've been working on over the past year. And we're really glad you joined us. We are going to be sending out the list of books along with others via email with a link to the recording of this. And I'm just going to throw out, does anybody have anything else they'd like to say that's here on the panel? Okay,
Yeah,
Ethan.
I would just say that I would encourage you, you know, all of the organizations that are represented here and other ones we work with. So Vermont Woodlands Association, Vermont Coverts, the Vermont Land Trust, Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife, Audubon Vermont, Vermont Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation, and others, that we're also trying to provide opportunities for people to learn in a lot of different ways about, you know, all kinds of different stuff, responsible stewardship of our forests, how to take care of our ecosystems, how to manage for wildlife really, really well, and a gajillion other things. We're trying to provide those opportunities all the time. So I'd encourage you to connect with those organizations and to follow them on social media, sign up for their e-news, and then you'll be kept in the loop when we're all, you know, just sending out information about all the stuff we're doing to try and help you understand this stuff better if you want to.
This is a helpful reminder that I should read a little bit more, but not tonight.
Well, the fire's going in my house, so you know, it's just, if it's going in yours, pull up a glass of eggnog. It's that time of year, and get a good book out and read for a little while. We encourage you all to do that and share what you've learned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
Good night,
everyone for
everyone.
being
Thanks,
here.
everyone.
Bye, guys.
Happy holidays.